In this video, we will talk about experimental samples and experimental population. Let's imagine that we have conducted a study on the users of hearing aids, and our study included 21 persons. These 21 people will be called test subjects, or they will be called our experimental sample, with n equals 21. We are using the data that we have collected from these 21 subjects in order to conclude something about all hearing aid users. And all hearing aid users are, of course, many more than 21. So another term that we are introducing in this video is experimental population, which means all these people who we have invited into our experiment, plus all other people who could have been our experimental subjects. They all together are called experimental population. And this is very different from the real population, meaning all people in the world, because here when we say population, we are only talking, in this case, about hearing aid users. So people who could have been our experimental subjects, or who indeed were. When we are designing a study, we need to answer two questions, which is, what will be the size of our experimental sample? In other words, how many people will we invite for an experiment? And also, how do we go and select these individual people once we have decided that, for instance, we want to invite 21 persons for our experiment? Deciding the size of the sample may be quite difficult, and there are statistical methods that would allow you to answer this question, although we are not discussing these methods right now. But just to give an intuitive understanding, the size of the sample needs to be a trade-off between the time and resources. So from this point of view, you want your experimental sample to be as small as possible and a good representation of the overall population. For instance, if we decide that we don't really have a lot of money for this experiment and we only pick one person for our study, we may conclude that everyone who wears hearing aids is called Bob and is 35 years old and can hear very well. And of course, this will not be an accurate conclusion about all hearing aid users. On the other hand, if we have a lot of money, we can go and invite everyone who wears hearing aids to be participants in our experiment. Thus, our experimental sample will be very large, and the data that we can collect will be very accurate, but it will take us a very, very long time to conduct this experiment. It will probably be never finished. So we really need to find a good trade-off here. Once we have decided what the size of our experimental sample should be, we need to go and actually invite individual people for the experiment. How do we actually do this? Well, let's imagine that our hearing aid users use two different types of hearing aids, and these people who are in red here, they use a new model of hearing aids. Now, in this example, there is about 7% of the population who uses a new model of hearing aids. For example, all of them attend the same clinic, and all of them were given these hearing aids by the same doctor. If we also go to the same clinic and recruit all our subjects there, this could be our experimental sample. But this will not be a good sample, because most of our experimental subjects will be using hearing aids different from what is the majority of population is using. If, on the other hand, we go to another one clinic and recruit all our test subjects there, it will be not a good approach again, because again, all our test subjects will be using hearing aids of an old model, whereas we know that, in fact, 7% of the population are using hearing aids of the new model. So the best approach in this case will be to go to all clinics that we know about and recruit randomly several subjects from each clinic, so that in total we have 21 subjects for our experiment. So just to conclude, we were talking in this video about two new terms, which is experimental sample, meaning the people who are included in the study or who will be included in the study, and experimental population, which is all people who could potentially be included in your study. And the main point is that experimental sample should be selected such that it is a good representation of the experimental population.